Utah Valley lies south of Salt Lake City, bordered by mountain ranges that rise gradually from the valley floor. The land is dry for much of the year, marked by sagebrush, limestone outcrops, and scattered dirt roads that lead toward the foothills. From the surface, the terrain appears open and stable. There are no visible signs of what lies beneath. In the hills west of Utah Lake, the ground is pocked with small openings. These are the entrances to a network of caves formed over thousands of years as groundwater dissolved soft limestone. Many of these caves are shallow. Some are complex. Most are invisible to anyone passing by unless they know where to look. Nutty Putty Cave sits in this landscape without markers or structures. Its entrance is low and narrow, cut into the side of a hill. For years, it blended into the environment, known mostly to local cavers and outdoor enthusiasts. The air temperature near the entrance remains cool and constant, unaffected by the seasons above. Inside, light disappears within a few steps. The cave itself does not descend in a straight line. It twists and folds, creating tight passages, small chambers, and dead ends. Gravity is not always vertical inside. Floors become walls. Walls become ceilings. Movement depends on touch rather than sight. Above ground, the valley continues its routine. Roads carry traffic. Houses sit quietly in nearby towns. There is no sound from the cave entrance, no indication of activity below. From the surface, nothing suggests urgency or risk. The ground gives no warning of how confined the space becomes just a few meters inside. This is where the story begins, not with danger, but with ordinary land, stable air, and a place long treated as familiar. Nutty Putty Cave was discovered in 1960 by a group of students from nearby Utah State University. The cave's name came from the soft, clay-like mud that coated its interior. When disturbed, the mud clung to skin and clothing, stretching and resisting before finally releasing. For cavers, it became both a nuisance and a defining feature. Unlike large commercial caves, Nutty Putty was never developed for tourism. There were no reinforced paths, no lighting systems, and no formal signage inside. Its appeal came from its accessibility. The entrance was easy to reach, and much of the cave could be explored without ropes or advanced technical equipment. This made it popular with families, scout groups, and beginner cavers. Over time, the cave's reputation grew. Its passages were tight, irregular, and confusing. Some sections narrowed suddenly, forcing visitors to crawl or squeeze through short constrictions. Others ended abruptly in small chambers with no room to turn around. The cave rewarded careful movement and punished haste. By the early 1990s, concerns about safety began to surface. Several rescues were conducted after visitors became stuck. In some cases, people had to be freed from narrow passages after hours underground. None of these incidents resulted in death, but they highlighted the cave's risks. In 2006, Nutty Putty Cave was officially closed to the public due to increasing rescue calls and environmental damage. The closure was temporary. After modifications were made and a permit system was introduced, the cave reopened in 2009. Access was limited, and group sizes were restricted. The goal was to reduce accidents while preserving public access. Despite these measures, the cave's physical structure remained unchanged. Passages did not widen. Turns did not become clearer. The same tight spaces that had trapped people before were still present. Maps existed, but they were difficult to interpret underground, especially for those unfamiliar with three-dimensional cave navigation. Nutty Putty remained a place that appeared manageable from the outside. Its dangers were subtle. They did not announce themselves immediately. For those who entered, the cave demanded patience, spatial awareness, and restraint. Without these, even a small misjudgment could lead to serious consequences. By November 2009, Nutty Putty Cave was once again open. It was within this context, of familiarity, prior warnings, and controlled access, that the events leading to the final incident unfolded. John Edward Jones was born in 1984 and raised in Utah. He was one of several siblings in a close-knit family and grew up in an environment shaped by outdoor activity and shared responsibility. From an early age, he was familiar with the landscape of the American West, including hiking, camping, and basic outdoor skills. Jones studied medical sciences and was enrolled in medical school at the time of the incident. His academic path reflected a long-term commitment to healthcare and service. Friends and family described him as methodical and motivated, with a steady disposition. He was physically fit and accustomed to controlled physical challenge through work and recreation. He was married to Emily Jones, and the couple had one young child. Emily was pregnant with their second child in November 2009. The family lived outside Utah, but Jones maintained strong ties to the state, returning often to visit relatives. Caving was not a central part of Jones's life, but it was not unfamiliar either. He had explored caves before, including Nutty Putty Cave in earlier years. Like many visitors, he understood it as a local site rather than a remote or extreme environment. The cave's reputation for tight spaces was known, but it was often framed as manageable with care. On November 24, 2009, Jones joined a small group of family members for a recreational cave outing. The group included his brother and several relatives. They entered Nutty Putty Cave under the permit system in place at the time. The plan was informal and unremarkable by local standards, a short exploration, followed by a return to the surface. Jones was dressed in typical caving clothing, coveralls, knee pads, gloves, and a headlamp. He carried no specialized rescue equipment. The group moved slowly through the cave, navigating familiar sections. At times, they split briefly to explore different passages, maintaining verbal contact when possible. As the group advanced deeper, Jones became separated from the others while attempting to locate a known section of the cave called the birth canal. This passage was narrow but passable and had been navigated by many before. The cave's layout made orientation difficult, and small deviations could lead into unfamiliar spaces. Jones believed he was entering that known passage. Instead, he moved into an uncharted area later referred to as Ed's Push. It was narrower, steeper, and led downward rather than across. This decision marked the beginning of irreversible isolation. Inside Nutty Putty Cave, movement depends on body position as much as direction. Passages do not open gradually. They narrow without warning, forcing cavers to commit their weight forward before the full shape of the space is known. Once committed, reversal can be difficult. John Jones entered what he believed was the birth canal head first. The passage angled downward and narrowed quickly. He moved forward on his stomach, using his feet to push and his hands to feel ahead. The space tightened around his chest and shoulders. Progress required him to exhale fully and compress his body against the rock. As he advanced, the passage continued to slope downward. There was no room to turn around. When Jones attempted to back out, his body would not move. Gravity pulled him further in. His feet lost effective contact with the walls behind him. At this point, Jones was inverted at an angle of approximately 70 degrees, with his head lower than his feet. The passage narrowed further near his hips. His arms were pinned beneath his torso, limiting leverage. Each attempt to move caused him to slide slightly deeper. Realizing he was stuck, Jones called out. His voice carried only a short distance in the confined space. His brother, Josh Jones, eventually heard him and located the position. Josh attempted to pull John back by his legs, but the angle and constriction prevented movement. The effort pushed John further downward. The passage ended in a dead-end fissure. There was no chamber beyond, no opening that widened. The only possible exit was the way Jones had entered. Josh exited the cave to seek help. Emergency services were contacted. It was clear early on that this was not a routine extraction. The position, depth, and shape of the passage severely limited options. By the time rescuers began arriving, Jones had been upside down for over an hour. Blood was pooling in his head due to gravity. Breathing became more difficult as pressure increased on his chest. The physical reality of his position began to define every decision that followed. The cave did not shift or collapse. There was no sudden external force. The situation was the result of a small navigational error inside a system that allowed no margin for correction once that error was made. By the time the first trained rescuers entered Nutty Putty Cave, John Jones had been inverted for several hours. His body was wedged tightly within the narrow fissure, with his head lower than his feet and his torso angled downward. The passage restricted nearly every movement. There was no room to adjust his posture in any meaningful way. In this position, gravity worked continuously against the body. Blood flowed toward Jones's head, increasing pressure in his face and skull. His face became swollen. Breathing required deliberate effort, as his chest was compressed between rock surfaces. Each breath depended on the limited expansion allowed by the passage. Rescuers assessed the space visually and by touch. The area was too narrow to allow a second person to fit beside Jones. All actions had to be performed from above, working down toward his feet. Communication was limited and often indirect. There was no line of sight between Jones and most of the rescue team. Initial efforts focused on stabilizing his position. Padding was placed where possible to reduce pressure points. A rope system was considered to pull him upward, but the angle of the passage made direct vertical extraction impossible. Any force applied upward also pulled him into narrower sections. As time passed, Jones's physical condition continued to decline. Extended inversion is known to cause serious cardiovascular strain. His heart worked against gravity to circulate blood, increasing fatigue. The swelling in his face and neck worsened. These effects were not sudden but progressive, unfolding hour by hour. Despite this, Jones remained conscious for much of the ordeal. Rescuers monitored his responses to questions as a way to assess alertness. Medical personnel advised that keeping him calm and still was critical to slowing physiological decline. Movement risked further wedging. Engineers and experienced cavers were brought in to assist. A mechanical advantage system using pulleys was assembled to apply controlled force. Anchors were drilled into the cave wall where possible, though the rock was soft and unreliable. Each anchor point had to be tested before use. Several extraction attempts were made. During one attempt, Jones was moved a small distance upward. This was the first significant progress achieved. The movement demonstrated that extraction might be possible with precise force and coordination. However, the passage narrowed again above his hips. The rope system placed increasing strain on the anchors. The cave walls, coated in clay, reduced friction control. During a subsequent pull, an anchor failed. The sudden release caused Jones to slide back down into the fissure, returning him to a deeper position than before. This setback erased hours of progress. The failure did not cause a collapse, but it eliminated the most promising rescue configuration. Rescuers reassessed options, aware that time was no longer a neutral factor. By this point, Jones had been inverted for well over 12 hours. His body showed clear signs of stress. The environment remained unchanged, cool, dark, and unyielding. The cave did not respond to effort or urgency. It simply held its shape, indifferent to the outcome. As the night passed into morning, the rescue operation expanded. Additional personnel arrived from county search and rescue teams, along with experienced cave rescuers from surrounding regions. Nutty Putty Cave was not designed for sustained emergency work. Every tool, rope, and medical supply had to be carried in by hand through narrow passages. The physical constraints dictated the pace. Only one rescuer could work directly above John Jones at a time. Others positioned themselves along the route back to the entrance, relaying equipment and instructions. The cave's layout forced rescuers to operate in prone or crouched positions for hours, limiting endurance. Engineers re-evaluated anchor placement. New anchor points were drilled higher up in the passage to reduce the angle of pull. This required working in unstable positions, often upside down or sideways. Each hole drilled into the limestone produced debris that had to be carefully cleared to avoid further constriction. A revised pulley system was constructed using multiple ropes and carabiners to distribute force more evenly. The goal was not speed but precision. Even a small shift in Jones's position could change the geometry of the passage and determine whether movement was possible. Medical teams monitored Jones's condition through limited observation. His breathing was labored but regular. Swelling in his face and extremities had increased. Extended inversion reduced his ability to regulate blood pressure. There were few interventions possible in such a confined space. Fluids and medication could not be safely administered. Communication between Jones and rescuers continued intermittently. Voices had to travel around bends in the passage, often relayed by others. Instructions were kept simple to avoid unnecessary movement. Jones was encouraged to remain as still as possible during setup. Another extraction attempt was made using the new anchor system. Slowly, controlled tension was applied. Jones moved upward a short distance. The movement was measured in inches rather than feet. Rescuers paused frequently to reassess pressure points and structural stability. For a moment, progress appeared sustainable. The passage above his hips seemed marginally wider than before. Plans were adjusted to take advantage of this opening. However, the clay-coated walls reduced friction predictability. The rope system bore increasing load as gravity resisted every gain. During a subsequent pull, one of the newly placed anchors failed. The limestone fractured under stress. The sudden release caused the rope system to collapse inward. Jones slid back down the passage, returning to an even steeper inverted position than earlier. This second failure marked a critical turning point. The loss of reliable anchor points meant that further mechanical advantage would require drilling closer to Jones's position, where space was even more restricted. The risk to both Jones and rescuers increased sharply. Medical advisors warned that Jones's body might no longer tolerate prolonged inversion. His heart rate was irregular. Breathing required increasing effort. Rescue leaders faced narrowing options: continue attempts with diminishing structural support or risk causing further harm through movement. Time was no longer measured in hours alone but in physiological limits. The cave had resisted every engineered solution so far. Each decision now carried irreversible consequences. By the second day, the rescue operation had been underway for more than 20 hours. Inside the cave, time was difficult to track. There was no natural light, no change in temperature, and no audible signal from the surface. Progress was measured only by physical markers and by John Jones's condition. Jones's prolonged inversion placed extreme strain on his cardiovascular system. Blood continued to pool in his head and upper torso. Swelling increased, further reducing the already limited space around his chest and neck. Breathing became slower and more shallow. Medical personnel advised that the risk of cardiac arrest was rising. Rescuers attempted to reposition Jones slightly to reduce the angle of inversion. Even minor adjustments required coordinated effort and carried the risk of deeper entrapment. Each movement was followed by long pauses to allow his body to stabilize. The passage offered no margin for error. Fatigue affected everyone involved. Working positions were cramped and physically punishing. Rescuers rotated when possible, but access limitations meant that relief was slow. Drilling additional anchors became increasingly difficult as the available rock fractured unpredictably. The cave walls did not provide consistent support. Another extraction attempt was considered using a different rope configuration. This would have required Jones to move through an even narrower section above his current position. Engineers concluded that the probability of success was low and the likelihood of further wedging was high. Communication with Jones became less frequent. His responses slowed. Rescuers continued to speak to him to assess consciousness, but intervals between replies lengthened. Medical staff recognized signs consistent with declining circulation and respiratory compromise. At approximately 28 hours after becoming trapped, Jones suffered cardiac arrest. Due to the confined space, immediate resuscitation was not possible. Efforts were made to restore circulation, but the limitations of the environment prevented effective intervention. After consultation with medical professionals on site, Jones was pronounced dead inside the cave. The confirmation was delivered quietly and without ceremony. The rescue operation shifted focus from extraction to safety and assessment. The decision was made to suspend further recovery attempts. Removing Jones's body would have required extensive excavation, placing rescuers at serious risk. The cave structure made such work unstable and unpredictable. The passage where Jones was trapped remained unchanged. The cave did not widen. It did not yield. The environment that had allowed entry continued to deny exit, indifferent to the time and effort spent within it.